Beef Market Update with Ann Dunford on realagriculture.com is brought to you by Haney Farms. Do you need seed? Find us at haneyfarms.com.
All right, it's time for another edition of the Beef Market Update with Ann Wasko. I am sitting in for Sean Haney, who is MIA, I guess. And we're talking cool. And it's not cool. So this week, of course, the USDA has come up with changes to cool that just about everybody in the industry would say have actually made it more restrictive, not less. So bring us up to speed on what has changed with cool.
Well, these amendments that came forward in March, comment period closed back in April, and so the final rule was published yesterday. And it basically is what we saw back in March, which is the more burdensome segregation issues. So I guess the key things, if you're talking about old versus new, is that each stage of the production phase will have to be identified. So born, raised, and slaughtered in. Whereas the whole commingling part of the previous rule has now been eliminated. So before you could have mixed production days at packing plants with Canadian and American cattle in the same day, but now that's gone. So that maybe it doesn't sound like much from the big picture perspective, but that's how most of the Canadian cattle were processed at these U.S. packing plants, is under this kind of mixed label or commingled label, if you will. So big change as far as the impact on Canada and Mexico. Don't forget Mexico is part of this as well.
Now, usually restrictions or segregating translates to cost. So do we have an estimate as to what this new rule is going to cost for slaughter?
Well, CCA has come out with some numbers, but first of all, I think as we go into this, I suspect now U.S. packers are dealing with their customers, their retail customers, and trying to figure out what they can and can't, and everybody, depending on how many foreign cattle you might have in your slaughter mix, everybody's going to have a different decision, especially those that are located along, say, a Canadian border or a Mexican border are going to have different ways of looking at it. But the U.S., the numbers that came out of CCA in regards to the changes in the cost of cool, the old one, prior to yesterday, they were saying $25 to $40 per head, which is big. They're suggesting that this one could be closer to $90 to $100 per head. And what that means, Lindsay, is, how does it relate back to? It's not just the cattle we sell to the U.S. We're not talking about that. The whole market becomes impacted. And so that's that basis or that price spread between Canadian prices and U.S. prices. On the cattle side, on the hog side, everything widens. Those costs, those uncertainties, all those things become a wider price spread and a wider basis. And right now, there's still a lot of questions. And so as to who might process Canadian cattle and who won't, and who will feed them and who won't, all those things are up in the air. And so while they're up in the air, you've got market uncertainty, which is never good for a market. Right,
exactly. And that, I think, is the key here. There's still a lot of questions. There is some talk that, like the original cool rule, that there's this 6-month sort of window of time where, older labels will get used up and time for everybody to adjust. But, I mean, this is coming, and it doesn't seem to be like there's a way. This was sort of the last ditch of trying to get this changed, and it doesn't seem like that's going to change, which adds this level of uncertainty, which of course then the market just pays for. So
exactly. So effective immediately, as you've just said, which was yesterday, with this 6-month education period, or what we call soft implementation, like happened with the 2008-2009 cool. But at the same time, for those of us that are in the business, we know how far in advance we're trying to do business in regards to placing cattle that are going to finish after that time frame. We're trying to procure forward contracts that are outside of that time frame. All of that basically stops. So even though it's a 6-month soft implementation, as far as we're concerned, it's pretty well starting now.
Yeah. And so that's just it. So are you seeing any reflection in the market right now? And really, I can only assume that we're going to be seeing this work itself into prices over quite a long period.
Yeah, and I think right now that seems to be the case. So, yes, there was Canadian fat cattle sold this week to be processed in the U.S. next week. So nothing changed there.
Mhm.
But as we march along down this road, you're going to see that impact start to come into play. And, the lighter the cattle, the further out they are, and that's where the more uncertainty is. So
Right.
that's the bottom line. And again, as you do some more interviews, I think you're going to find out this whole process to try to retaliate and react and all those kinds of things is such a long, slow process that for those producers on the ground, extremely, extremely frustrating and disappointing.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you, Anne. We will certainly touch base again soon, but this is not the last we've heard of this, nor the last we'll talk about it, unfortunately. But thanks again.
Okay, thanks, Lyndsey.